Hello there. This is Mark Mix from the Norma Zinveld studio here at the National Right to Work headquarters. It's a great privilege to have Steve Moore with us today to kind of talk about lots of things, including right to work. I know that most of you tuned in to see Steve. It's hard to go a week or a night without seeing Steve on a major news channel talking about the economy, and certainly he has lots of experience in Washington, D.C. and talking about economics. It's a real privilege for me. Steve and I have known each other for, probably, well, at least 2 years, right? We're not, neither of us are that old.
2 years.
Yeah, but it's been a long time, and Steve's been a great advocate for right to work over the years. He came to Washington, D.C. in 1983 and spent some time with the Heritage Foundation there, and then he ended up being on President Reagan's Privatization Commission. He was the research director for President Reagan and their administration, talking about privatization of certain government activities. He was at the Cato Institute for 10 years. He was at the Wall Street Journal as an editorial board writer there for several years.
That was my favorite job.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that was good. I remember one day, I think it was 2007, I was at the airport waiting to go through and pick up my bag at the airport. I get a call, and it's Steve Moore from Washington. He calls, Mark, what's going on in Iowa with the right to work law? I said, well, I'm out here to testify. And the next morning, to show the power of the National Right to Work Committee, there was an unsigned editorial about the economic damage that would be done if Iowa repealed their right to work law.
And I won't say who wrote that editorial.
Yeah, that's right. That was Steve. And not only has he been an advocate from his perch at the Wall Street Journal, but as an economist, he and Art Laffer have put out a study year after year at the Heritage Foundation and ALEC called Rich State, Poor State, where they analyze the economies of states, and right to work is a pretty important aspect of that. Yeah. He worked for Dick Armey at the Joint Commission in the U.S. Congress. He's been an analyst in the Fox News Network. He's been an analyst on the CNN News Network, which was kind of interesting. I'm sure that was a great experience for him. He's running a little operation now called the Committee to Unleash Prosperity while he's still serving at the Heritage Foundation as a senior fellow there. Steve has been around the administration and been around Congress for a lot of years, and right now President Trump trusts him to be one of his key advisors on how we're going to reopen this economy. Steve has been a strong advocate for President Trump. He was on the campaign helping out in 2016. He wrote a book called Trumponomics in 2018. He's a well-established author and just an all-around good guy. And we like him because he's a friend of right to work and the idea of individual freedom. Not only does he promote free markets in our economy and wants an economy that operates with the greatest amount of freedom as possible, but he understands the element of individual freedom in America's workplaces and how that fits into the overall economic structure of our country and how it will lead to unleashing prosperity. So, Steve, I'm going to ask you to kind of go through what's happening in the economy. If you can tell us some details about what the president's thinking, what you and Art Laffer and a few other economists who are sitting down with his staff and him to talk about how we move forward from where we are. If you could do that, sure. We'd like to do that. We're going to have time for questions for folks. What we'd like to do is have Steve address these issues, and that'll help stimulate some questions. And then, obviously, I'm going to have to talk about right to work a little bit, too. So, good. Steve, why don't you tell us about what you think is going on and what you think the president's up to and what you're advising him.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I'm such an admirer of what you do and what all of the people here do at Right to Work. It's an indispensable organization, so I appreciate it. I see this guy sometime 11 o'clock at night at airports. We're crossing paths, and you're coming back from this city or that. You're amazing. So I'll start by saying, a good friend of mine named Tom Smith. Some of your members may know Tom. He was a self-made man, grew up very dirt poor, and built a business that was highly successful and is a major donor to the free market conservative movement. I'm on his board, the Thomas A. Smith Foundation board, and he gives to all the right causes. But he's 91 years old. And about 4 weeks ago, he called me, and he's also been a happy warrior. He's always upbeat, but I'd never seen him so sullen. And he said, Steve, I lived through the Great Depression. He said, I lived through World War II. I lived through the Vietnam War. I lived through 9/11. I've lived through the Great Recession. He said, I've never been more worried about our country than I am now. And I said, oh, Tommy, you're not worried about the coronavirus? He said, no, not the coronavirus. What our government is doing in terms of these incredible powers, we've never seen anything like this in our lifetime. The suppression of freedom and individual rights in the name of combating this germ. And, when he said that, I thought, he's right. He is right. And so I'm actually on leave from Heritage. I'm heading up this effort where I'm working with the president and a number of other free market groups to try to make sure that we, number one, open up the economy as quickly and safely as possible. Number two, we stop this insane spending that is going on, which is, here's one that'll knock off your socks, Mark. I have a piece that'll probably be in the Journal in the next few days that shows that if we were to pass this latest Pelosi spending bill, this $3 trillion bill, government spending as a share of GDP would go to 52%. That means our entire government sector would be larger than every business, all the output of every American worker. There's something seriously wrong with our country when that happens. So we're trying to fight back against that. I know, right to work is a major part of that freedom movement. And so I think what's the current situation right now is I'm feeling, if you'd talked to me 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was in a bad mood. I was really in a bad mood. But I do think things are going better now.
Yeah.
I feel better about things. You know why? Because we've got these red states that are opened up. You've got Georgia, you've got Florida, you've got Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, you've got Nebraska's open, Idaho's open, Utah. By the way, these are probably all right to work states.
They are.
When you think
The
about
top
it.
10 states you cited today in your email on Committee to Unleash Prosperity were all right to work states.
Yeah. And so those states, folks, are not only opening up their economy, getting commerce flowing, and it's going to be slow. People are afraid. The media has really played a big role here in scaring the bejesus out of people. People are afraid. I have family members who are normally rational people. They won't even go outside of their house. They're so afraid. We know a lot more about this virus. We can get into that later. But in any case, so you've got the red states open. And then think about the states that are closed. I mean, think about this, Mark. I mean, when I was driving over here, I was thinking about this. Okay, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Illinois, California, Washington, Oregon. Is Michigan right to work?
It is a right to work
all
state.
right,
Yeah.
that's the only one that doesn't fit the pattern.
That's right.
But
That's
all
right.
the other ones are, shut down. They're impoverished. These Democratic governors are impoverishing their own citizens, and they are destroying their small business framework and the infrastructure, the economic infrastructure of their states. I was in Chicago on Monday, Memorial Day, for a big rally to open up the economy because Pritzker is one of the worst. Is he a right to work guy?
No, absolutely
I
not.
wouldn't think he would be.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just a tool of the teachers unions. But in any case, we had over 2,000 people out. Peacefully protesting. That's a constitutional right. The left wants to take that right away from us too. But the reason I mention that, and this is so important for your members to understand. Some may be in Chicago. I'm sure you have members in the Chicago area. I'm a Chicago boy. I grew up. I think Chicago is one of the great world-class cities in the world. I love Chicago, and it is the capital of the Midwest. And walking down Michigan Avenue, walking down State Street, it was like ghost town. Ghost town. It was so sad, Mark. All these small businesses, little immigrant businesses, delis, stores, grocery stores, things like everything was shut down. And you can't do that. You can't do that to an economy and think that somehow you can just switch the ignition switch and it's going to be back on. It's going to be a tough summer. We've done severe damage, and I'm writing a column right now, and then I'll stop talking, called Never, Never Again. Never should we do this, where we shut down. A society cannot function if people aren't producing things, right? I mean, it's that simple. You can't function as a society without people going to work and businesses producing things. I mean, you're just going to run out of things. We'll be like the Soviet Union. Everything will be, you'll have all this free money. We're printing all this money. But at some point, you run out of food. You run out of merchandise. You run out of things because nobody's producing things. And so, but I do feel the red states are putting the pressure on the blue states to open. I think in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see states like Illinois and New York and even California open up, and that will be a very positive thing.
Yeah, Steve, if you could look down 3 months, 4 months, 5 months down the road, and the president's obviously under pressure. There's no way he can win because if he does too little, he's to blame. Right. If he does too much, he's to blame. Yep. There's really no way to thread the needle. And I think governors like Newsom and Cuomo understand the politics of all this. And I think thinking about an economy restarting without California and New York, even though people are migrating out of those states in droves, they're still engines of an economy. And I think they realize the political nature of how to continue to shut this down to pressure the president. How's the president feeling about this? I mean, he seems to be an optimistic guy, and he seems to be lots of energy still. But I mean, when you sit down in the room with him and he's getting blamed from all sides, what positive things can you tell him, or what positive things can we look for to think that maybe 3 or 4 months from now there's actually some green shoots, to use a word from, when was that, 2008 or 2009? I don't know.
I have not seen the president probably in 3 months now because he's been in lockdown. So we've all of our meetings. You mentioned I'm on his economic recovery task force. All of them have been via phone calls, and that's appropriate. The president can't be coming in contact with people we don't. The last thing we want is President Trump to get coronavirus. But he's, by the way, one of them. Just as an aside, that guy's a freak of nature. I mean, you think you work a lot, Mark, and I know you do. That guy goes 20 hours a day practically. Wow. I mean, he'd call me up at 2 in the morning, like, "Hey, Steve, what do you do?" "Sir, I'm sleeping," like most people are. But he's amazing. So he's always been so incredibly healthy and so on. And so I can't say how he is in his demeanor now because I haven't seen him in a while. But I know from just talking to him on the phone a few times, he's frustrated. I'd say frustrated is the word, because Mark. And I'm really proud. I work with Larry Kudlow and Art Laffer, and I were kind of the economics team when he was running for president. We put this plan together. It would come, late 2019. We get that trade deal done with China.
Yeah.
We get the U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement done. Starting in 2020, the economy was booming. I mean, boom! One of the strongest economies. I mean, I know a lot of your members are owners of businesses, and tell me if business wasn't good at the beginning of 2020, because almost every the business confidence index was just soaring because of the great things that were happening. And so I think what's frustrated him is that in 2 months' time, think about this, Mark. We went from an economy that's 6 million surplus jobs. That's 6 million more people with more jobs opening than people to fill them. Now we have 35 million people unemployed. Yeah. And I think what we've done in our country in the last 3 months has been horrific. And we've learned a lot of lessons here, but one is you can't shut down a $20 trillion economy of free market businesses and entrepreneurs and expect it to just fire back up again.
Yeah. So it's interesting, Steve, you mentioned that. I'm going to jump in with a question from Victor in California. He says, based on what the President Trump knows now, do you think it was a mistake to shut down the economy? Thanks for the question, Victor. That one was so apropos to what Steve was talking about.
It's perfect.
Yeah. You be careful now.
I know. Yeah. First of all, I don't think the President had any choice, really.
Right.
And I would make a couple of ways. This is a really important question. Number one, President Trump did not shut down the economy. This is important for people to understand.
Yes.
He declared a national emergency, which was appropriate. I mean, we didn't know a lot about coronavirus at the time. And, people, I remember it was just pandemonium. Remember, people, so he basically said, appropriately, the states will take the lead. And a lot of people don't know. There were 8 states that never shut down anything.
Yeah.
And then you had various degrees of shutdown. I'm not going to speak for the president, but I'm going to say this. I am absolutely convinced, and I think more and more free market conservatives, I was one of the first people to say it, this is insanity, what we're doing. But I think now almost all Republicans and conservatives and free market people understand we made major mistakes here. The reason I think the president is so frustrated is, let's take Cuomo, for example. You mentioned him. Did you see his press conference on Monday? He said, we don't know what we're doing here. All the science that seriously, I mean, people should look at this. Go to YouTube. He said, we don't know what we're doing. All the science and all the experts were wrong. He said, I don't know how long we're going to keep New York closed down. And he admitted that all the experts and the science and all the studies were wrong. And they were wrong. Remember the 2 million deaths figure? That was, not only was that bad science, that wasn't even science. That was just made up. And remember, that headline is what led to the shutdown. People, even I was like, 2 million people are going to die. It was not even close to the truth. So one of the lessons here is sometimes the left is, listen to the science, listen to the science. Well, many, many times the science is false, just like the media can be false. And so I think the president, I'm not going to answer that question about whether he thinks it was a mistake, but I will say this. There is nobody in Washington, D.C., including you and me, there is nobody who wants to open up this economy more than Donald J. Trump does.
Right. I think that's right, Steve. And again, so let's talk about, we want to get things open. States are starting to reopen. What does that look like 6 months down the road for the economy? I mean, obviously you've talked about the trillions. I mean, we had phase 1, which was 8.3 billion, then 97 billion, then 2 trillion.
Those were only the billions. Then we got into the trillions.
Then we had 2 trillions, and we had another 400 billion as
and
phase
now
3.
3 trillion.
And now 3 trillion. I mean, and now they're still talking more, right?
So here's what I think will happen. I do not believe we're going to have the V-shaped recovery. Donald Trump has talked a lot about that, where we just, we went way down and then we go way up. I hope I'm wrong, but I'd love to see a V-shaped recovery. But I just think we've done so much damage. These businesses, again, the one thing I love about your organization, you represent these small, medium-sized businesses that are the spinal cord of our economy. You can't just shut it off and shut it on. That's the problem with these politicians. None of them ever run a business. They don't know anything. Do you think Nancy Pelosi knows anything about business? I mean, seriously, knows nothing. So I do think it's going to be hard for these businesses to get up and running, and it's going to take some time for restaurants and bars to get people to go back in. They've been scared to death. So I think the summer is going to be really bad. I think we're going to have 20% unemployment, maybe 25. That's really bad. Yeah. And by the way, this is not an act of nature, folks. This was an act of man that we imposed this on ourselves. But I do think because we have Trump, cutting taxes, reducing regulations. He passed that big regulatory relief bill last week. I think the fall we're going to start to see a recovery, and then they're going to have an election. And that election, I believe, is going to be an enormously important one. And I believe it's going to come down to one question for the American people. Who do you believe, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, can restore growth and prosperity to America? And God, I pray the American people get that one right.
Get that one
right. It's not hard, right?
Yeah, indeed. It is. Let's talk about the $3 trillion that Nancy Pelosi got through the House of Representatives. Included basically $1 trillion straight out to the states. And one of the things we've been talking about, Steve, and this is something to kind of address it tangentially, is the idea of these pensions. I mean, this money is going to states that have not, this is not coronavirus emergency money. This is paper over years of mismanagement that includes making promises to union officials who have monopoly power over government employees in many of these states, California, New York, Illinois. I mean, I don't think you'd argue with me if you take the biggest political power in Illinois politics is the Chicago Teachers Union. They get whatever they want.
By a mile.
Yeah. And then AFSCME and the SEIU, the two government unions, and you've got a power structure there that basically controls Springfield and Chicago. Right. So these pensions, I mean, these are, we had the one legislator from New Jersey saying we're going to be on our knees begging the federal government for $130 billion of bailout money. We had the Senate Majority Leader, Don Harmon, in Illinois saying, we want $41.9 billion right now. We want $15 billion unattached, no strings. We want it. And what they're asking for is really to solve problems that have been years in the making, making promises to workers and making promises to and services in government that could never been fulfilled. They were all Keynesians, in the long run we're all dead, so let's just give everybody everything.
Yes.
I mean, talk about the pension system and what that means. I mean, we have a question from Brett in Maryland. What are the chances of any kind of taxpayer-funded bailout of the already bankrupt multi-employer pension plans? That goes to, like the Teamster Central States plan where, employers put in money and then when companies disappear because they go bankrupt, others have to pick up the change. Yes. Can you address some of that issue?
Well, those are two separate issues. Yeah. Because there's the pensions of the government employees that you started talking about. And as long as I've known you, we've been talking about this issue. I mean, it's not like, Illinois has a $100 billion deficit in their pensions. They've known that for 20 years. They just have refused to do anything about it. Same thing with California and so many of these other states that have massive pension deficits. When I mentioned the fact that I'm leading this coalition group, one of our single biggest initiatives is to stop any blue state bailout. Yeah. We cannot. It is, first of all, it's terrible. It's unconstitutional. The federal government, all you're doing is this idea that somehow the federal government can bail out the states. No, the federal government can only get money if it takes it from the states in the first place. Yeah. I mean, the logic of this, that somehow, we're going to help all the states. No, the federal government doesn't produce anything, folks. It's a swamp. All it does is take money from you, and then it sends 90 cents back on every dollar you give. So first of all, it's just fallacious. All you're doing is redistributing. So where are you redistributing to and from? Well, in this case, it's obvious. Red states are being raped and pillaged so they can, have pensions paid for. And I'm going to go beyond that, by the way. It's not just the pensions, although that's a big part of it. Yeah. Here's one of the reasons I'm so adamantly opposed to the federal government giving any more money to the states. By the way, we've already given them $150 billion. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
They've already given them $150 billion. Mm-hmm. And it's because of this. We become enablers of states to stay shut down. The only way Michigan can stay shut down and Pennsylvania is going to stay shut down and New York and Illinois can be shut down is because they really believe there's a pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. And all of a sudden, the federal government's going to write them a check. And we have to say, Trump should say, no, it's not coming. You're going to have to start doing something about your budgets, adjusting your budgets. You're going to have to do something about your pension plans. We're not writing you a big check. And if Cuomo knew that, if Newsom knew that, if Pritzker knew that, they would have no other choice but to open up their economy.
Yeah.
But, and by the way, how is it fair? The left loves to talk about fairness, fair, fair, fair. How is it fair for people in Tennessee and Texas and Georgia that built up rainy day funds, that acted fiscally responsible for the last 20 years, that have opened up their economies? Now they have to pay additional taxes to bail out Illinois and New York and California? No, I mean, not just no, hell no to that.
Okay.
Now, on the pensions, multi-employer pensions, I'm not an expert on that. I know there's a lot of lobbying going on. I get calls every day, hey, where do you stand on this issue? And these are also these pensions that, and I believe these are union pensions.
Yeah,
right?
they are,
right.
quote, co-employer union
Right.
pensions. The unions negotiate them, and they take them in, and then they manage the money in a large way, and there's trustees, of course.
Right.
But some of this money ends up in casinos, some of this money ends up
exactly.
in disappearing.
So what's going on is that you've got some of these big companies like UPS that are really lobbying for a bailout of those pensions. And then you've got some Republicans say, well, let's bail it out because it's a lot of these workers are in Pennsylvania and Michigan. We got to win these states. So there's all sorts of different things going on. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. I'm opposed to it, though. I don't think the federal government should have to be a bailout private pension plans.
Steve, how much more bailouts can we do? I mean, you
Exactly.
talked about this on the Money
Right.
Show a couple weeks ago. You talked about this and somebody asked you the question about it. How much can they do? I mean, at what price? What is the price of government?
Well, first of all, it was Milton Friedman. You knew Milton. I knew Milton. Most of your members are advocates of Milton Friedman. And, he taught us the most important lesson of economics, which is there's no such thing as a free lunch. I mean, if you're giving somebody something, you have to take it away from somebody else. I mean, Laffer talks a lot about this. If you and I are two people on an island, and you're going to get some benefit, the only person who can pay for that benefit is me, right? So, again, there's this illusion of free money out there right now. And I think part of that, by the way, Mark, is being driven by the fact that look at the interest rate on the 30-year bond right now.
Yeah, right.
It's 1.3%. Yeah. I mean, by the way, I'm not an investment advisor, folks, but if you buy one of those 30-year bonds at 1.3% interest rate, you're crazy. Because, is there anybody who actually thinks over the next 30 years inflation's going to be less than 1.3%? I mean, I would say that the chances of that are very remote. But that has enabled some of this borrowing because what's going on is everybody wants to own dollars now because whenever you have a financial crisis, everybody rushes to the dollar.
Yeah. So I want to transition a little bit into some of the union monopoly power that's caused some of this. We talked about papering over some of the huge deficits been created, but we have a Democrat governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, that basically by executive order said we're going to withdraw union bargaining privileges over 50,000 state employees. We've had the South Dakota legislature that's repealed union bargaining for their higher education employees. We've had the city of Las Vegas say, you know what, we're going to put our union agreement on hold so that we can actually control our government. One of the things that we see,
they're just saying
we're going to stop it. Of course, the unions are suing them, and lawsuits are.
That's a really interesting development because I don't see any other way out of it for a lot of these states. Right. I mean, that's why all these unions are coming to Washington and saying, "Hey, bail out the states because that money is going to go right into
directly,
the union coffers."
Right, to paper it over. Yeah. So, and we've been obviously strong advocates for eliminating that union bargaining.
There must be. I mean, I'm not a legal scholar, but I wonder if states actually have the authority to break these contracts to do that. I mean,
I think they'll do it and they'll litigate it, and then some judge will either allow them to continue to process while the legal cases go on. In Las Vegas, we know the union has filed a lawsuit against the city, the county commission.
But it certainly would be appropriate to me, I mean, if I were governor, I'd just say, look, here's our balance. Here's the money coming in, here's the money going out. We got a big deficit. There's no way, and just say, look, you're going to have to renegotiate this contract. You're going to have to. We don't have the money to pay it, and if you force us to pay it, then we're going to have to slash services and things, and we can't give you a good contract later. So there has to be a way where the unions provide some give on this, or else they're going to have to slash their workforces and things like that. So because by my estimates, state and local receipts are going to be down at least 30% this year.
Oh my goodness!
At least 30%. Because think about it, sales taxes, income tax. I mean, income's down, sales is down. I mean, so I do think that the unions are going to have to come to some agreements with these states.
Well, speaking of that, here's a relevant question to that, Steve. Richard in Illinois says early Sunday morning, the legislature in Illinois passed a new budget with no cuts.
Yeah.
The governor said, "Oh, we can't get it from the federal government because of COVID, or with federal, or we can get it from the federal government." How can irresponsibility like this be stopped? I mean,
yeah. In fact, I was just reading the Wall Street Journal about Illinois, Richard, that they actually gave like raises to workers. Can you imagine that? So they're living in la la land. They really are, and that's why I want Trump to just make an announcement. First of all, I think Donald Trump should have a State of the Union speech in the next week or two for the whole
that's
country.
a good idea.
And just say, here's the situation. He could say, look, we've made some mistakes. We're learning about this as we go. We think we've reached a turning point. If you live in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Illinois, New York, put pressure on your governors and mayors to get things open. But then he should say, loud and clear, we are not bailing irresponsible states out. It is not fair to the states that acted responsibly. And if he did that, I think it would stop some of these states from passing these very irresponsible budgets.
Yeah, I think you addressed that earlier in saying, they literally are thinking that there's this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and we've enabled them.
It's like giving a drunk another drink.
Yeah, right.
I mean, does that solve anybody's problems?
Yeah.
No.
Let's talk about from an employment perspective. I heard you on the Money show that you did a week or two ago. You talked about 31 states that are literally paying employees more to stay home than they would to work. Talk about that for a minute.
It's just a disgrace. That first bill, anytime, to quote my friend Arthur Laffer, anytime Congress acts when they're drunk or when they're in a crisis, they made bad decisions. And that first bill was really a bad bill. Yeah. And it passed unanimously in the House and Senate. So that should have been a tip-off that it was a bad bill. Yeah. And so what they did was they made two big mistakes. Number one, I was in favor, and Laffer was in favor, of a loan program for small businesses when the government was closing down, the economy was closing down, to give these businesses that were healthy before the crisis hit a bridge loan so they could get through the next 6 months so that they could be up and running when the economy would recover. A loan, L-O-A-N. That means you pay it back. And what they did, because of Pelosi and some people in the White House, and I won't mention names, they basically said, no, let's make this a forgivable loan, where if you don't lay off people, you don't have to pay it back. So guess what happened? This is so predictable, right? Every healthy business signed up for the loans, right? Because they weren't going to lay off people anyways. And so and it was always the way Washington works is all the people with lobbyists and stuff, they knew how to get first in line for the loans. So the small business Main Street, USA, they couldn't get the loans. And so that was number one. And we should by the way, if, and I'm against any aid to the states, if we give them any aid, it should be in the form of a loan, not a grant. So the second mistake we made is not only did we provide them these workers 100% unemployment benefit, meaning they get their entire salary, but we also gave them $600 a month addition to that. So in 31 states, people were getting paid more when they became unemployed. And I have a friend who runs a construction company. I bet a lot of the people watching this can relate to this. He had 100 employees. He was still going strong. The day after they passed that bill, 40 of them just walked off the job.
Oh, my goodness. 40
of them just said, I'm not. Why? And why, the ones who stayed on the jobs who were honorable people, they were the suckers, right? They have to still get up at 6 in the morning. They still have to, construction's hard work, right? And they work hard, and yet the guy who's watching TV gets more? Yeah. What's wrong with that picture? So, and we still haven't fixed that. Pelosi wants to extend that policy, folks. I'm not making this up. Pelosi wants to extend that policy through the end of the year. Gee, why do you think she might want to do that? Yeah. To extend the unemployment, for months and months and months. Maybe it's because there's an election in November.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it just seems irresponsible, and I think that we're kind of disincentivizing ways to recover from this by.
Oh yeah, because businesses. I bet again a lot of your members can relate to this. It's going to be hard to get people back on the job now.
Yeah.
We do have businesses that are hiring now. And here we are. Think about this, Mark. We have 38 million people unemployed, and businesses can't get people on the job.
Yeah.
And what's wrong with that picture?
Yeah, it is interesting. Let's switch gears just a little bit here and talk about, and obviously want to talk a little bit about right to work. I want to talk about your rich state, poor state analysis that you've done every year for the last probably 10 or 15 years. You've talked about
12
the
years. 12 years.
12 years. Okay.
This is the first year we're not going to do it because we're a victim of the coronavirus.
Yeah,
so
right.
We'll have to skip
Yeah, but you and
2020.
Arthur Laffer put this together, and
Yes.
someone else is now involved in
Yeah.
it, and you put this out. And basically, you look at the economies of every state, and you look at various tax policy.
About 20 variables.
Yeah,
Yep.
regulatory policy. And one of the things you include is right to work. And I think every time, and this has been demonstrable prior to the COVID-19, the right to work states have outperformed. And not only in your study, but just literally in private sector job creation, in manufacturing job growth, and the real kind of value-added manufacturing and jobs that create wealth, that create opportunities for workers. And the union officials they argue about right to work all the time, and obviously they have self-interest because it's a pretty neat deal if you can force someone to pay you in order to work. That's an outrage. But talk a little bit about that, about how you see these kind of the business environments beginning to separate themselves. We see that from a right to work perspective. The right to work states, the tire industry's gone to South Carolina. The automotive industry's gone below the Mason-Dixon line. Steel manufacturing, new kind of industry and heavy industry is going to right to work states. And we had the aluminum rolling mill in Kentucky where a guy said, he was in Illinois, and he said, look, you passed the right to work law, I'll bring $1.8 billion in investment to your state. He did it.
Wow.
And now there's new jobs, diversifying the economy there. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you, because I think when we first met, there were like 22 right-to-work states, and now
something like that. Yeah, there were actually probably 21.
Okay.
Yeah, so
and how
now
many
we're
are
27.
we have now? Yeah,
27.
so that's amazing. You've done amazing work, and so congratulations. And in some of the toughest states too, right?
Yeah, they're pretty tough. Yeah, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So, and that's because the governors were looking at the evidence.
Yeah.
They were saying, look, we can't attract businesses if we don't become right to work. When I was at the Wall Street Journal, we were visited all the time. Every week we'd have editorial board meetings with, CEOs of major companies, that are major employers. And what they'd say, when we look at where we're going to put a new factory or a new warehouse or a new business center, they say, if it's not to right to work state, we don't even consider it.
Yeah.
So they're not even in the game,
Yeah.
right? So now they're looking at and so it's really important to businesses that they be right to work. And we say that that's the second, and you and I might have a little argument about this. We think it's the second most important factor.
We would argue that. Yeah, we would definitely argue
factor.
about that. Yeah.
The first important factor is how high the taxes are.
Sure.
But they're close though. I mean, and those two things, you look at the states with high taxes and that are forced union states, and those states are just bleeding jobs. And what's so interesting is these blue states, it circles back to our discussion about what's happening in the blue states now where they're not opening. I believe that bleeding of blue states is going to accelerate now. And these states like New York and Illinois and and unfortunately Michigan and Pennsylvania, if they don't get new leadership, I think that you're going to see a bleeding out of their businesses. I talked to a guy in Wisconsin. He may have been a right to work member, and he has a factory with about 100 employees. He said, "Look, if Wisconsin's not going to open up in the next 2 weeks,
Oh, boy.
I'm going to Arizona." I mean,
boy.
and he built his business in Wisconsin. He said, but look, if they're not going to let me operate, I have to operate. This is the other thing politicians don't understand. Without revenues, a business doesn't exist.
What?
Yeah, right.
Explain that
That's
to me.
revenues,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So
yeah.
he said, I can't keep this lockdown. There will be no business left to reopen.
Yeah. Well, we're getting ready, gearing up to a political season that is going to be unlike any we've ever seen. Steve, you and I talk. We meet with a lot of folks. I've been a warm-up band for Steve Moore many times on stages. He's the featured guest. I warm the crowd up a little bit, but we talk about politics and we talk about elections and we talk about this election. We have the White House, the House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, and probably 1 or 2 seats on the United States Supreme Court, and then the federal judiciary. Other than that, it's not important. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, take this emergency.
I'm just going to add one other thing. One of the things we've really learned in this emergency is how important governors are.
Oh.
Governors are incredibly important. They really, and some of these Democrats have acted like they're a dictator. Where you listen to what Governor Cuomo is saying, or what Governor Pritzker is saying, or Governor Evers in Wisconsin. And what a shame, by the way, that Scott Walker wasn't the governor of Wisconsin to get Wisconsin through this.
Sure.
Because it would be in much, much better shape today if he were still governor. So yeah, it is an incredibly important election. I'm just going to say it. I think if we have a really weak economy in the fall and you elect Joe Biden as president, I think we would have a Great Depression. I think we'd have 5 years of very high unemployment. with a lot of disinvestment in the United States, all of the great things that we were able to accomplish under Trump. I mean, they keep saying they want to repeal the Trump tax cut. Why? Why would they want to do that?
Yeah.
It's been a huge success. I mean, we had wages rising. We had 6 million surplus jobs. We had the lowest unemployment rate 50 years. We had minority, wages rising. We had low-income people's wages rising. You had all of these stores like McDonald's and Burger King and Walmart. They were raising their wages because it was such a tight labor market. You and I obviously want workers to be paid as well as they can.
Absolutely.
We just don't want the government to dictate that. It's the law of supply and demand. And so I do worry about what would happen because, folks, I mean, it's important to understand, Joe Biden would not be running the party. This would be Pelosi and AOC and people like that. Did you see AOC, that crazy woman? She's on one of the economic task force of Joe Biden.
Yeah,
that tells you a lot about.
Well, and five union officials are on that task force as well. We put out a story about that the other day. That he's getting.
Who do you think runs the Democratic Party? When you see it's the radical Greens, it's the labor unions, it's the school teachers, and they're completely in charge. And if you think that this shutdown now, I forgot to make this point, but it's important. I've been saying for 2 months now, this is a trial run. This shutdown of the economy for coronavirus is a trial run for what? Climate change.
Yeah.
So I mean, the left is writing. You can't believe this. This has been such a wonderful shutdown of the economy. Look at our carbon emissions are going down. Wow, what a wonderful thing. We put 40 million people on the unemployment line, but we're reducing our carbon. So I mean, think about this. If they can shut down the economy for 2 months to save a few thousand lives, what could they do to save the whole planet? So those are the kinds of things that are at stake here. If you're in the oil and gas business or the coal business, your businesses are in great jeopardy if we have Joe Biden as president.
Let me circle back to an issue I forgot to mention, but I think it's important because in knowing you all these years, Steve, you have made economics kind of simple, and it's important for me to be simple.
It's not complicated.
I
mean, no, seriously. Yeah. Economics is not complicated. The only people who don't understand economics are the PhDs at Harvard
that are overeducated. Yeah. Well, we have employees. We have a print shop and a mail shop, and we have an operation in Virginia Beach, and we have a couple of employees that are using the COVID employee leave to take care of children who were basically rushed out of school, and now daycare has been shut down. And so, but the formula for, we're getting a payroll tax credit, but we have to, there's 6 different tests and 6 different iterations and 2/3 of this and how to calculate hours going back 6 months. You have advocated for basically just a payroll tax holiday or setting it aside.
Yes.
That's simple. It makes sense.
Yes.
As an employer, that makes perfect sense to me. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we're trying to, Laffer and I and Steve Forbes are trying to put, and by the way, the other guy who loves this idea is DJT. Donald Trump loves this idea too. And the idea is, look, stop giving all these aid, all these spending programs, and they all have big administrative costs.
Right.
You have to collect the taxes, then Washington bureaucrats shuffle the money around, they get paid for that, then they send back to the states, and then, probably get about 70 cents out of the dollar that actually goes to the people in need. This, boom, all of a sudden you starting, let's say, June 1st, your paycheck, my check, my paycheck, everyone in this room's paycheck is reduced by, they get a 7.5% pay raise.
Right.
Because the money isn't withheld from your tax. And then for an employer like now your payroll costs will go down by 7.5%. Yeah. I would think that means you might be able to hire. It helps you with everybody's facing financial problems in this tough economy. But it's hey, maybe we can bring on a couple more workers because our payroll costs are down. So this is a big deal. Trump wants to do it. Pelosi hates the idea because she wants the money.
Victor asked a question. He says, "What are the odds that Pelosi and company will approve payroll tax?"
Well, here's the point, Victor, is that what we need to do is we need to take it right to her and say, look, Nancy Pelosi, you say you care about minimum wage workers. You say you care about working class Americans. Why are you against giving a minimum wage worker a 7.5% pay raise? Why are you against that construction worker who was working for $20 an hour? Now he gets $23 an hour, whatever it might be. Why are you against that? Because I think she has a hard time explaining that. And by the way, that issue is not just good policy, it's great politics. So we did some polling. Yeah. We asked people, what would you rather do? Have the federal government give money to the mayors and governors, or have a payroll tax cut so you get more money in your paycheck? 68% give the money, show me the money.
Yeah.
And about 22% say give it to the mayors, and those are probably the public employee people. But this is a great issue from a political and policy perspective. We need to get everybody behind it, and we need to force this. This is the thing. I mean, Victor asked a good question about, well, what about Pelosi? I'm sick and tired of Donald Trump negotiating with Pelosi. There's nothing that Nancy Pelosi wants to do, folks. Nothing that she has proposed that's good for the economy, good for workers, good for businesses. Everything in that bill that she proposes is radical left-wing stuff. And so what I want Trump to do is go over her head. Remember the way Reagan used to do with Tip O'Neill. If they had a conflict, he would give a speech to the American people, right?
Yeah.
And he'd say, call your congressman. And wouldn't it be great if Trump gave a speech and said, I want to give you a 7.5% pay raise. The only reason you can't get that 7.5% pay raise is because of Nancy Pelosi. Call your congressman, call your congresswoman, and tell them to give me a 7.5% pay raise and let me keep more of my own money. Yeah. I mean, don't you think that would be a good strategy?
We've got a phone bank going right now. Our Virginia Beach phone. We're calling the Colorado legislature trying to stop the imposition of a statutory bargaining bill for all government employees. It's working. They announced today that they're going to put off anything that has a fiscal note for the remaining 2 weeks.
Good job. Good job.
Our phone bank is ready and able.
People really, members of Congress, because you guys do such a great job of that. I know how you can flood the Capitol with calls or flood state capitals, but the people, I worked on Capitol Hill. I want to let your members know that is what these people in Congress.
Oh, but Steve, they say it doesn't affect us.
It has a huge impact. It really does. The first thing the congressman or congresswoman does when they walk in the office, the first question they ask, what are you getting calls about? We've gotten 52 calls today of people who are opposed to Bill 128 or whatever it is. What's that? Oh, that's the forced union bill. Believe me, they listen to that stuff.
And that's the strength of the right to work movement. We're at a time. Steve's got another event coming up about 4:30, and we're at a time when we want to take questions. If we haven't asked your question yet, go ahead and get them in now, and we'll get them up on the screen, and I'll ask them, and then we'll let Steve answer them because we're running a little bit short. I want to be respectful of Steve's time. I'm not sure. Are you going to be on TV tonight anywhere, Steve? You're going to be.
I'm supposed to be on Fox, but they've been. They're supposed to have this as we speak. I think they're having this launch of
the rocket.
So everything's kind of messed up on the schedule.
SpaceX or whatever it is. Okay, John in California. While it would be counterproductive to attempt prior to November, have you any sense of Donald J. Trump's interest in the repeal of Davis-Bacon of 1933 during his second term? Now, Steve, remember this is the prevailing wage law, where if you have state and government money, you know about it. For example, when Pete Wilson had the earthquake out there, he suspended prevailing wage, and they got the job done under budget and on time. We're in an emergency. One of the provisions of Nancy Pelosi's bill, the 6800, the 1,850-page bill, says that any subcontractor, any contractor doing work with federal money has to be paid prevailing wage, which is a 30%, up to a 30% increase in the cost of government services. What do you think?
Well, we've been, and I've been fighting that fight for 30 years, and I do think it's time to bring Davis-Bacon to just repeal it. It was a bill that was discriminatory in intent back when it passed, and it's discriminatory in its effect. It's just a tough one. Trump, remember, Trump. I believe there's a big difference right now between the private sector unions and the public sector unions. Trump did pretty well with private sector union workers. So we'll see about Davis-Bacon. I would love to see it repealed because you could do so many. People talk about the infrastructure crisis. If you got rid of Davis-Bacon, you could build more roads, fix more dams, fix more airports. I always say without Davis-Bacon, you get got 4 roads for the price of 3.
Right. Sure. Glenn in Virginia asks, we have become economic illiterates, where far-left charlatans like Bernie Sanders and AOC capture the public's attention and set the agenda for so many Americans. Have the forces of freedom allowed the public agenda to be hijacked by the left, and how can we get it back?
That's a great question. And number one, I was thinking about this the other night. What we've done, remember I mentioned, government could reach 52% of GDP this year.
Oh, my goodness.
I don't think in Bernie Sanders' wildest dreams he ever thought something like that could happen. So
right.
We're to the left of where Bernie Sanders was right now. So now then the question is, why is this happening? Why do we have economic illiterates? Why do we have people who can't even mention what the rights are in the First Amendment? I mean, why? And the answer is, you all know the answer. We're paying a high price for the last 30 to 40 years, allowing the left to take over the government schools. Yeah. And they are indoctrinating kids from the second grade, if not in kindergarten, with these left-wing ideas, and they're not learning about the Constitution, they're not learning about American history, they're learning about climate change, they're learning about racism, but they're not learning about the greatness of our country and the rights. And I was very disturbed by, I was looking at some polling on the shutdown, and one of the groups that is the most in favor of the shutdown is millennials. Millennials, and that it's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I was looking at the poll. Millennials, they have a higher, they value safety and security over freedom, and that is the road to tyranny. They don't, think about this, millions of Americans, we just celebrated Memorial Day, the millions of Americans who've given their life to protect our freedoms. And this generation does not all of them, of course, but I'm just saying that the millennials, and so folks, if you want to reform in the system and you want to fix that problem, we have to do something about the government schools because they are indoctrinating, they're not teaching. Yeah. What's the old saying, that what schools are supposed to teach people how to think, and now what they do is teach people what to think. Yeah.
Duncan in Colorado says, what do you see as being the biggest hurdle of cleaning up the swamp? You've been here in D.C. for a long time. We've tried to do these things. Reagan tried to do it. The Bushes allegedly tried to do it at some point, but here we are. Any suggestions about how we do this?
Well, term limits would be good. I've always been a big advocate of term limits. I don't know. I can't even, given what we've done just in the last month or two, I mean, we just elected a president whose most famous, line before the election was drain the swamp. And Americans around the country get it, about how devious and destructive big government can be. And yet now here we are with the biggest government ever. We just have to keep talking about draining the swamp. We have to keep educating people that when you send your money to Washington, you're only getting 80 cents on the dollar back. So why would you want to do that? Yeah. And get rid of the high-powered, price people, the lobbyists and the lawyers. And 3 out of the 5 wealthiest counties, even today, are here in Washington, D.C. Yeah,
that's scary. Shane in New Hampshire says, do you believe that this crisis, this is a great question, will give big labor an advantage or disadvantage going into the 2020 congressional election? This goes to your point about the separation between private sector workers and public sector workers. And any thoughts on that?
I'm not as pessimistic as most people are about the election. Look, if it had not been for coronavirus, Trump was on stage for winning. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
On stage for winning a 40-state re-election landslide. I mean, we had the best economy in 35 years. Now it's going to be a dogfight, no question about it. But ultimately, the reason the Democrats are going to lose is very simple, because the Democratic Party today has become the party of lockdown. They have tethered themselves to that line, lock down the economy. 3 or 4 months from now, people aren't going to be talking about coronavirus. They're going to talk about jobs. They're going to talk about, how do we make businesses grow, get investment. Trump has the formula for that. Biden's against it.
Yeah. William W. in Ohio says, this is a great question for you, Steve. I'm interested to hear your answer. Considering all the money being made out of nothing, what prediction do you have for inflation in the next few years and its effect on pay? Now, that may be a short-term question and a long-term question. You want to address that one?
Well, we have deflation now, believe it or not. So flat prices are falling right now. Consumer prices fell in the last 2 months. When you've got a 30-year bond at a 1.3% interest rate, there's not a lot of inflation fear out there. But I do think there's got to be some day of reckoning, right? You can't just keep borrowing and printing money and thinking that somehow, that it's free. I do think prices are going to rise as we come out of this, and that's going to be a second challenge. So I think it's a great question.
Okay. Matt in Florida, to what extent has the Janus decision impacted big labor's political activity? Janus, as you might know, you probably know, Steve, was our case litigating on behalf of an Illinois employee that freed every government worker in the country from being forced to pay dues or fees to work for their government.
Well, I'm going to let you answer that.
Yeah, well,
you know about 10 times more money about Janus.
Well, we think it's going to make a big difference. Yeah. We know that no government worker can be compelled to pay fees in order to keep their jobs with government. We know that immediately upon the Supreme Court ruling back on June 27th of 2018, that literally $500 million of union revenue just disappeared. We've been litigating. We have probably another 30 or 40 cases litigating. We actually just filed a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court to get Mark Janus his money back. One of the things about constitutional law, Steve, is interesting. And this case goes all the way back to 1886, a case that says, if something is deemed to be unconstitutional, it's as if it never occurred, as if it never happened, and there is no protection, there's no nothing for it. So what we're arguing is, let's go back and get the money that was taken unconstitutionally from these people, and obviously that's literally billions of dollars from organized labor. They're obviously fighting it. They're putting up this good defense. We have a basic for reasonable defense on this, good faith defense. We're trying to break that down. We'll be in the Supreme Court looks like they may conference our case on June 11th. Look, if we can let public sector workers and if we can let them choose whether or not to support labor unions, it'll hold union officials more accountable. That means they get out of politics per se, unless they spend money that's specifically given by people that give it on purpose. And give it with authorization to play in politics. And if we can get, the unions, because they can collect the money from private sector workers still in 23 states, they're not accountable. They can spend this money on politics, and they do. They're one of the biggest spenders in politics that we know of. So
it's always been a big problem.
Yeah. We got one more question, and we're going to let Steve go. Peter in Massachusetts says, why don't Republicans take action to make the Democrats' unions illegal in the public sector, in local, state, federal employment? They don't have the votes in Congress, but could use federal courts up to the Supreme Court, right? You want me to take that one?
Yeah, well, I'll just say I agree with you, but I do want your response to it.
Yeah.
It's something that when I was at the Wall Street Journal, we wrote a lot about.
You did.
And I think wasn't it FDR who was opposed to public sector unions?
It's unthinkable we would unionize the government.
Yeah.
And the Executive Council and George Meany at the AFL-CIO said the same thing. You just can't. It's not the same as the private sector. This notion that we've created a public sector labor law that mirrors kind of the confrontational adversarial model that we have in the private sector, where you're the CEO, you know what the bottom line is. I'm the union guy, says we need a $10 raise an hour, and you say, Mark, we can't do that. And there are substitute goods there. So we're going on a strike. Widget company B, Moore Incorporated over here, is making exactly what you make. They pick up market share. You lose revenue. You go out of business. In the public sector, that model does not work.
Yeah,
because
the way we like to put it was, it's like, so the unions elect the public officials,
right. Yeah.
then they sit across the table from them and negotiate. And that's part of the problem, because there's nobody at the negotiating table. How did Illinois' pension system get so inflated and so ridiculous, where you have people making $125,000 a year, more money on their pensions practically than it's because the politicians were representing the unions, not the taxpayers. But here's the other problem. What happened with all these pensions is even good governors, they're like, okay, I'm going to be gone in 4 years. I don't care what's going to happen in 15, 20 years. So give them what they want. Buy peace with the unions, and that's what happened. And now the day of reckoning is here, and that's why public sector unionism is bad. Before we go, I want to mention one last thing.
Sure.
I forgot. I should have said this at the outset. So we are now. I have a newsletter we put out every morning. You're getting at the Prosperity.
I am. And issue number 38 this morning. Actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so I want to just, anybody wants it. You're going to love the price of this. You know how much it costs? $0.
I think it's
free.
$0, right? I haven't paid for anything.
Yeah. All you have to do is, if you want to get it, just go to Committee on Unleashed Prosperity website, just sign up. And then what we're giving people is the real, non-phony news about what's happening. The lies that have been told to the American people about COVID, about what the states are doing, and there's been no apologies. There's been no setting the record straight. What the Washington Post and New York Times and CNN and MSNBC are saying has been so outrageously and possibly purposefully false. So, people love this little newsletter because all we're doing is giving people, and you can read it in 5 minutes, just for 5 or 6 bullet points, but it does tell you the real research, and I would really encourage people to get that.
It's called the Committee to Unleash Poverty. Prosperity. No. We've already unleashed poverty.
Yeah,
we're unleashing
we did that
prosperity.
Already.
Yeah, CTUP. And edition number 38 came out today, and I've been doing radio interviews with hosts across the country, and I've been using Steve's data that comes out in this really quick little sheet, comes out about 9 o'clock every morning.
Yeah, and John Fund, many of you members know John. He's
Steve
the editor
Forbes
of that.
is involved.
You got it.
Folks that have been strong. Steve, thank you for being here. I know
great. I love what you guys do. Thank you all for supporting the American worker and fairness in the workplace, because it is one of the most important movements in America today, and we've been fighting this fight for a long time. When was Right to Work?
Committee 1955, Foundation 1968.
So 75 some years.
You do the math.
I can't do
You're
it in
the
my
economist.
Head. 45, 60, almost 70 years. So it's amazing, and thank you. And you couldn't do it without your. And this is a tough time. I know.
Yeah.
I raise money for my little thing, and it's tough to raise money now because everybody's feeling financially strained. But now more than ever, your contributions really can make a difference in winning these important fights that are going to have an impact on our future generations. That's what I'm so nervous about, is this massive borrowing $6 trillion this year alone, folks. $6 trillion, not $6 billion, $6 trillion. Who do these politicians think that's going to pay for that? It's going to be your children and your grandchildren and your grandchildren's children. That's child abuse, folks. We can't allow it to happen.
Yeah. Steve, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in from here at the Right to Work headquarters of the Norma Zimdahl studio. It's been a pleasure to bring this. This is kind of our first attempt at this, and I've never hosted a talk show before, but
the new Oprah Winfrey,
Steve
folks.
Carried
the
the
new
weight.
Oprah
Steve
Winfrey.
carried the weight. Thank you all, and look up Steve Moore and his committee to unleash prosperity. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Fist pump.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.